This slide will cover information on another category of drugs called opiates. What drugs are considered to be opiates? These include Norco, codeine, heroin, oxycodone, Vicodin, methadone, fentanyl, morphine, Dilaudid, buprenorphine, Percocet. I am guessing that you've heard of at least some of these. The 3 effects of opiates that I'd like for you to be familiar with is as follows. Analgesia. Analgesia refers to pain reduction. So if you hear that a drug is an analgesic, then you know it's a pain reducer or painkiller. The next effect is opiate euphoria. Unlike other forms of a high from other drugs like stimulants, opiate euphoria is the state between being awake and being asleep. If you will, it almost looks like a person is nodding off. I remember working in the field of chemical dependency, and there was a time where there was a gentleman who came in to see if he can get some help, and unfortunately he had to use heroin to be functional enough to catch transportation to the location where I was at. I offered him a glass of water, which he accepted, and he was so in and out of it that he couldn't even reach for the water cup properly. So it's this state between being awake and being asleep. And then the third effect is constipation. So when we take opiates, it actually prevents the regular flow of our bowel movements. What I would also like for you to know is that opiates interfere with a neurotransmitter called endorphins. Endorphins actually help to reduce pain. So it kicks in when we go into shock, when we're injured, when we are pushing ourselves physically to the limits. So if you think of someone who is a long distance runner, for instance, a lot of times they talk about pushing through a wall, not a literal wall. But up until that point, they start feeling exhausted. They start to feel the pain sitting in. But if they just push through that wall, then all of a sudden it's like all their pain goes away and all they do is focus on the rhythm of their breathing and their feet hitting the ground beneath them. This is an example of endorphins kicking in. On a molecular level, opiates look very similar to endorphins. So neurons that typically receive endorphins in receptor sites will actually accept opiates in those very same receptor sites because, again, they look so similar on a molecular level. What this causes is then the neuron will release endorphins into the brain, flooding it with that neurotransmitter. The opiates that I mentioned that are commonly known, like codeine and morphine and oxy, these are agonists for endorphins, meaning they mimic endorphins, therefore causing that neuron to release endorphins into the brain. But there are some antagonist opiates, so they block the reuptake of endorphins. And these include naltrexone and naloxone. But again, the ones that we focus on in this class, the better known ones, the more commonly known ones, those are agonists for endorphins. The other danger that I'd like for you to be familiar with for opiates is the fact that the brain will start to produce less of its own endorphins after prolonged use. This is especially true for someone who is a heavy long-term user. What happens is the brain starts to rely on the opiates to provide this pain-reducing function. And as a consequence, it won't produce as much as it would usually of that neurotransmitter. So it relies on those opiates to provide that pain reduction purpose. This can actually happen long-term so that even after a person stops using opiates, their brain can still not produce as many endorphins as it naturally would. A person becomes physically dependent on opiates. So they actually need it to function. Otherwise, they start experiencing withdrawal symptoms that make them sick. And these include hot and cold flashes, sweating, muscle tremors, and stomach cramps. I remember someone sharing this with me, and I thought, wow, that just sounds like the flu. And he said, no, Christine, you don't understand. It's like someone trying to rip your stomach out of your gut without using any anesthetic. So he said it was extremely painful. Now think about this. Not only is withdrawal from opiates already painful, now you add to that the fact that the brain is no longer producing as many endorphins as it naturally would. So it just magnifies the discomfort and pain that that person is experiencing during withdrawal. Also, if someone's been a long time heavy user, a doctor might recommend that they do not just quit cold turkey, that it would be safer and better for them to wean off gradually. That's where drugs like methadone or buprenorphine come in to help wean that person off the opiate. Otherwise, that person's going to experience very severe withdrawal symptoms. They might even vomit in their sleep. These can all cause complications when someone's withdrawing, so they try to reduce that risk. When someone actually overdoses on opiates, what happens is the body just gradually slows down and just shuts down completely. So you'll see a person breathing slowly, even more slowly, until they just stop breathing. Opiates are commonly used for people who are very ill and in hospice care, meaning they're passing away because of some kind of condition. Morphine is commonly prescribed to help alleviate their discomfort and sometimes to help a person, when they're passing away, pass away with more comfort. So when we're looking at overdosing on opiates, you see a lack of control of breathing and just ultimately respiratory failure. So all of these bits of information are the things that I'd like you to be most familiar with regard to opiates and their effect.